Governor George Wallace has just returned from a 10-day tour of 4 Midwestern states, Ohio, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. The purpose of the trip Wallace likes to put this way: to inform you people of the dangers in the so-called Civil Rights Bill. The governor of Alabama logged several hundred miles on this trip. It took him 10 days to make it, to hold 7 news conferences, to make 6 television and 6 radio appearances, and to visit 10 industrial giants in various cities, and to make 8 speeches. Our purpose in making the trip with the governor was to allow you to hear and to see him, and to present a fair assessment of the impact he made on those who saw him. The trip started Tuesday, February 11th, in Cincinnati, Ohio.
He was elected governor of Alabama November 6, 1962. He was given the largest vote ever given a gubernatorial candidate in the history of Alabama. Young Americans for Freedom is proud to present a great champion of our American constitutional form of government, Governor George Wallace.
Seniority rights of every union member will be. So if you go to hire somebody on a job, you're going to have people of all races and ethnic backgrounds and religions working on this particular job. But it's going to be too bad for you folks if you all happen to be Methodists, because the Baptists have got to come in, and some of you might have to change your religion. I want you to read the bill. I noticed that none of you held up your hand that you'd read it, so I want you to read this bill, because the purpose of this is to remove discrimination, as it so calls, in the matter of employment.
Given the Civil Rights Act passes and comes before the Supreme Court and is found constitutional by a majority of the court, will you respect the decision of the Supreme Court and faithfully execute the law?
Of course, it won't be a responsibility of the governor of the state to be executing the federal law. That'll be up to the Justice Department and the federal courts. But of course, if this bill is found to be constitutional, and I don't even believe it will be if it passes, but if so, there's one or two things going to happen in this country. You're going to be under a police state, because it'll take a police state to enforce it. Or second, it'll be so unenforceable, it'll be like the 18th Amendment. The federal government will come to some sanity in the matter and turn it back to the states. But of course, if she becomes the law, of course she will be either enforced or not enforced.
Jeffrey, why did your organization invite Governor Wallace to speak at the university?
We had heard the governor would be in town on this date to speak in the evening time, and we heard also that he would be available to speak at the university during the day. We decided at that time to ask him to come up. Many of people in our group are interested in the civil rights aspect of the legislation before Congress, and we thought the governor certainly would be an authority upon it. Possibly also the governor would mention points of the civil rights bill that are not elaborated on too much in our area. That is one of the main reasons.
Well, you were here, introduced him, saw the crowds. What would be your assessment of the way the man was received here?
He was certainly received very politely. People listened to what he had to say. They agreed with part of it. Many disagreed with parts of it. But all in all, I think it was a cordial reception, and certainly some people did agree with much that he had to say.
Well, do you think the invitation was worthwhile?
I believe it was very worthwhile from the aspect that we did hear some other points of the civil rights legislation which passed the House today, but will still have to meet its test in the Senate. And I believe that people will be stimulated to follow it more closely and possibly even read it through to its completion.
As you know, and as any citizen in this country should know, the scope and the size of federal governmental activity and control which goes with that activity has been on the rise in recent years, for a good part of the past half century, to be sure. And we know this. We as a library are dedicated to publicizing the dangers inherent in this governmental growth. And the scope of governmental activity has reached the danger point. It's gone beyond. You as Southerners know this perhaps even more than the average Northerner. And we feel that it's highly important to have the citizens of our community have a chance to listen to the point of view of the highest elected official of a Southern state. And we're proud to be presenting Governor Wallace here today. It's a great pleasure for me personally because, after all, you should know as well as anyone else that the northern press, the liberal press, has distorted, maligned, and acted in a derogatory fashion toward the southern position quite frequently in the past few months and during the recent events.
On Wednesday, the governor flew to the capital city, Columbus. Ohio's Governor James Rhodes was out of town, so they did not meet. Wallace spent much of that day contacting industrialists, impressing them with Alabama's potential. He is confident that one or two new industries, possibly destined for locations in Birmingham and Mobile, will open branches in Alabama because of his visits to them.
Because if I quoted all that Abraham Lincoln said, you'd be picketing his statue around here instead of some other folks. I want you to read what Abraham Lincoln said in his debates and I might say to you that I do not agree with him that there are certain people in this country who should not vote and serve as jurors or hold public office. But it would be interesting to know that the liberals sometimes quote only that portion of what Abraham Lincoln said and doesn't quote it all. And you have a library here at the Ohio State University, don't you? Do you have a library here? I know you do. You got one of the finest libraries in the country. Now you go to the library. Oh, haven't you? You really haven't? Well, I mean, I thought you had. I thought I was saying something that was right, and I know you have. You have a fine library. You go to the library and look up the works of Abraham Lincoln and read some of the things that he said. By the way, Abraham Lincoln belongs not only to you people, but he belongs to the people of the South also, because he's a part of American history, the same as Robert E. Lee and the Confederate flag is, too.
Of all the audiences to which Governor Wallace talked during this trip, the speech at Ohio State created the most drastic change in the attitude of an audience. The governor is, in effect, placing himself on the chopping block each time he takes the rostrum at one of these northern universities. It is a credit to the governor, not as the chief executive so much as personally, that he is able to sway audiences, some more than others, but to sway audiences with the weight of his personality. Neither is that this to say that he can, in less than 2 hours, change in any drastic way the thinking of any person to whom he speaks. He does, however, cause many who hear him to wonder and probably to seek out more information on this liberal-conservative controversy. The governor left Ohio on Friday and flew into Chicago. There were no public speeches in that city, rather a steady round of television and radio interviews and industrial visits.
I say that your problem in Cincinnati and Cleveland and Philadelphia and Washington is infinitely greater than Alabama. We have more racial peace in our state, which is, and I commend the Negro and white citizens of Alabama for it. I am only glad that we do not have the problems that exist in the big cities of the United States above the Mason and Dixon line. I'm controversial a lot of places, and I understand they've let Carl Braden speak, a member of the Communist Party. I don't see why there wasn't much controversy developed about him. Why should they develop controversy about a man who's an anti-communist? Looks like a communist, he can get to speak anywhere without the controversy. Gus Hall spoke at Yale. Got a very polite reception, but I couldn't speak there because I'd cause trouble. There's no such thing as federal aid to anything. The aid that you get from the federal government comes from the taxpayers' pockets of the state of Ohio and the state of Alabama. It's taxpayers' aid. All they do is tax you and me, carry it to Washington, throw most of it away in Rangoon and Gaboon and all over the world, and then send you some of your own money back with certain attachments to it that you must do certain things or you can't get your own money back. So the matter of federal aid, there's no such thing as federal aid, it's taxpayers' aid. Your aid and my aid, because that's where the money comes from.
As you all know, the Minnesota Symposium has been conceived, planned, and is now being executed with one primary purpose in mind. This purpose, ladies and gentlemen, is to bring together representatives of what we consider and what are objectively and obviously some of the great current concerns facing the American government in 1964 and for the future.
Property is desirable, is a positive good in the world. Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own shall be safe from violence when built, end of quote. It is readily apparent that the loss of respect for the rights of private property will destroy the initiative and incentive of liberty and freedom-loving people. It is this damaging trend which we find shot through the Civil Rights Act of 1963. And I can tell you that some of those who are today speaking about compensation are those who, after this act passes, will say we must tax and divide property in order to compensate for those who do not have property. In other words, we now even have people who are pushing the Civil Rights Bill, some of them making speeches that indicate that they might be interested in the matter of even land reform. Most people think this bill is aimed at Alabama and Mississippi, And they think that this bill is going to take care of the Alabamians and Mississippians who are mean heathens. But my friends, this bill affects every individual in the state of Minnesota. It affects every business. It affects every school system in the state of Minnesota. This bill provides for the takeover of the system of education in this state by the U.S. Commission of Education. Those who are sponsoring this legislation and advocated it say it will remove racial imbalance in the school system. And of course that is what it can be used and will be used for in this state.
Governor Wallace left Milwaukee and flew to the capital, Madison, on Tuesday morning. Here he was scheduled to speak to the University of Wisconsin's Discourses in Dissent. No cameras were allowed in this auditorium. Even newsmen armed only with a pad and pencil had a rough time getting in. This audience at the University of Wisconsin was the rudest of the entire trip. There were shouts and ridiculing comments, but on the whole, the audience was attentive. Outside, 300 pickets ringed the building, singing and shouting.
I hope you might come in on the chorus, even if you're standing in the back, including those in uniform. I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. I'm from Louisiana, my true love for to see. It rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death, Savannah, don't you cry. Here we go. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. For I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. Once more. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. For I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. Well, that's pretty good when you're still eating dessert.
We've been tranquilized by these social engineers who brought about a lot of misunderstanding, marching hand in glove with inflammatory statements. They say you're a bigot, a racist, a reactionary, prejudiced, ignorant. They've lulled the American people into a defensive position. Accusations of immorality in the field of human rights, of course, have tranquilized many of our people. And these pressure groups still have a day of themselves in which they arrogate to themselves the right to choose which groups that you're going to associate, the right of choice of others, which to me is a human right. Of course, the time is up, and I can tell you this, that this bill today is a bill that will destroy the American concept of government, American concept of free enterprise. Now, if you want this done, do not be misled. Let's don't be emotionalized into destroying our system in the name of causes and platitudes. Let's know what we are doing. And I hope that you people will know that we are not fighting against any people in our part of the country. I don't have time because the time is up, because we want to see all people prosper in our part of the country. We want to see educational opportunities for everybody.
I caught Governor Wallace in a rare moment in a room with 30 visitors the day before he was to depart for Montgomery, and I asked him there to summarize his impressions of the tour.
Well, I feel that we have had the opportunity to talk to lots of people in the Midwest and tell them some things about the pending civil rights bill that they did not know, because most people in this part of the country thought that this bill was aimed primarily at Alabama and Mississippi, and when they found out that it was aimed at the entire economy of the country and every phase and aspect of governmental life in the country, that many were surprised. And I think that this has been good. The people of this great part of the country have received us very courteously, and I feel that those that we've had an opportunity to speak to, and especially those over television and radio, because we reach thousands in that manner that otherwise we would not have reached, I feel that they are more informed about the attitude and philosophy of the people of our part of the country. The industrial part of the trip has been highly successful, as you know.
Yes.
One industry has already announced an expansion while we were here in the
Decatur.
Midwest. That's right, in Decatur, Alabama. And we have another industry that's a good bet for an announcement soon. And every one of the 12 industrial prospects are very interested in Alabama. In fact, they had evidence and interest even before we came here. So I feel the trip's been very, very worthwhile, and I'm very grateful for the kind, courteous way that the people have received me, and especially here tonight at the University of Wisconsin, where the people have been very nice and kind to us here.
What is your frame of mind when you go on one of these trips? So many of the audiences are hostile, and so many of them you win over after facing this deficit.
Well, really, we haven't faced any real hostile audiences anywhere in the country. In fact, most young people are willing to listen to the other side of a proposition. And as you know, when we were at the University of Ohio and places like that, why, it was almost as if we were speaking in Alabama.
Well, the change at Ohio particularly was obvious.
That's right.
Plan any more trips like this, do you know at this point?
No, this is the last trip we're going to make. Of course, we're going to make some more industry-seeking trips, and we will accept, of course, invitations every now and then to speak, but...
The extended tour like this?
No extended tour. This is the last of our extended tour.
Governor, there's one final question I'd like to ask. Again, it's a personal interest. How do you take the physical beating? I've taken one myself.
Well, of course, it's very physically exhausting and even mentally exhausting, but I think that the fact that I know that we have been well received, the fact that I know that we are doing our cause good, of course, makes it possible to continue.
We also talked with 3 members of the press corps. They are Bob Ingram of the Montgomery Advertiser, Jack Hopper of the Birmingham News, and Bill Austin of the Huntsville Times. I asked Ingram first for his opinion of the highlight of the tour.
To me, the most significant thing that I saw on the Midwestern tour was the tremendous turnout of college students to hear Governor Wallace. There was a concerted effort made on every campus to heckle him and to harass him, but at the same time, the curiosity of the students, the interest of the students, vastly outweighed their hostility. And on 2 campuses, it was not confirmed, but the crowds were believed to have been the largest ever to hear a speaker. He just had untold thousands at every campus, and I think this is significant. I wonder if there's any other public official, certainly in the South, who could attract half as many people as Governor Wallace did on this tour.
Well, I partially agree with Bob about this, but to me the most outstanding thing was a television program that was in Chicago. The name of it was Cups Show. On this program it was a panel sitting around informally talking, and had an ultra-liberal, a moderate liberal, a conservative, and Governor Wallace. They had Chuck Percy, who is a Republican candidate for governor, who is one of the youngest, most successful businessmen in the United States, and had a conservative and had a law professor from Northwestern University. This brought more questions, and you got more, really you had 4 points of view about conservatism versus liberalism, and to me this was the outstanding thing of the whole tour.
Well, there were a number of high spots in the tour. Whether you consider it a success or not, and I'm not going to judge it, I think the fact that Governor Wallace was received, that he was able to perhaps bring about a better understanding between peoples in the South and the northern states, Midwestern states which he visited, is very significant, and I think overwhelmingly that they got a better opinion of the peoples of the South through this visit. And because, as Bob said, that there were some places were expecting a man with horns, as the governor said, and they found a gentleman who is able to talk and able to convey his opinions to audiences in a dignified manner.
To correctly assess whether the governor of Alabama is successful on these trips, one must know why he went in the first place. He goes, he says, because he's invited to speak in these various places. So given that fact, the invitations, and no other, it is difficult to make an assessment without saying if. If he goes to issue a warning about the Civil Rights Bill with hopes of having his warning heeded, he is not as successful as he might be. If he goes to convert his listeners to his conservative viewpoint, including his attitude on segregation, then he is unsuccessful. If, however, the governor takes these trips to prove to those who see him that he does not have horns, then he is successful. If he goes to prove that he is an articulate, mentally alert person, then he is eminently successful.